Got one last game in week 6, and it actually looks like this one might be a shootout, perhaps one of the few good games we get on Monday Night Football. And of course, today we're going to build lineups 3 different ways. I'm going to hand build a lineup using all the data that I look at from Sports Info Solutions. We're going to then hop over to the Optimizer on Fantasy Cruncher, see how the projections align to give you guys the best lineups possible. And last but not least, of course, we will run some simulations on Stochastic and see who are the best players? Who are the guys you must play on Monday Night Football? Let's find that out right now. Of course, I am already in a DraftKings huddle single entry here. Of course, 15K to first place. We're going to hand build the lineup here. Shouts to the chat as always. The question is, which team will Dak throw to? Dak's certainly a guy that's had some inaccuracy issues in the past. This year, everything the Cowboys have done has been meant to limit Dak's interceptions. And now, instead, what they're seeing is the least efficient version of Dak possible, at least last week against the Niners. A player in Dak that was maybe losing his confidence that he showed in the growth he had with Kellen Moore last year. Lots of fun things coming up here. Shouts to the chat as always. No one told me spooky season was calling that or was called that because players keep dropping. Yes, after last week, all of my beloved players have been injured. And frankly, every week in DFS, I think I've had at least one guy go out with an injury every game. For you guys out there, I feel bad for you if you're dealing with the injury stuff. Yesterday, a lot of guys, like 6 different injuries yesterday of note for the fantasy community. But that's the name of the game here, of course. What do? We dust ourselves off. What happens when we fall off the horse? We get back on. We hand build some lineups here. So let's start it out. And I think right away, let's get into something interesting that I've talked about before in matchups against the Cowboys. Mentioned last Sunday night showdown. I put in a handful of lineups and went better for me than it did yesterday, where I tried to get really unique here, played all lineups under 45,000 on DraftKings, ended up having right configurations, but not getting to the 4-2 Giants build. Last Sunday night showdown, what I did went heavy George Kittle captain. That paid off exponentially. You know why? Because the Cowboys are incredibly bad against tight end on the year, giving up a 1.04 expected points added above average per target. So what that means, every time that a team is targeting the tight end against the Cowboys, they're getting much more likely to score every time they get the field. Every time a tight end is targeted, it's basically worth 1 point to the opposing team. So what does that mean? A guy like Gerald Everett could be very interesting tonight. Currently questionable is Donald Parham. So for me, one guy I'm going to immediately put in the lineup here is going to be Gerald Everett. The workload's not great for him, and this is something that I sometimes struggle with in these showdown kind of builds where Everett has 5 targets as a tight end so far this year. Parham basically right there with him as well. So it's not like Gerald Everett's getting targeted that much, but I do think because the advantage that's there, because he is on the field a good amount of the time, playing 41.5 snaps per game, only 17.5 routes. But again, he's out there. I think Everett's the first guy I'm going to put into this lineup here. Just the best matchup for tight ends right now in football is going against the Cowboys. That could change over the course of a year, but you do not see 1 expected points added per target going to many positions for any team. And the Cowboys is a really good defense. That's one thing that right away you want to lean on because everything else for the Chargers, I think, is going to be hard to come by. That said, we do know that Austin Ekeler gets the ball in a lot of creative ways. It's his first game back. Some re-injury risk, I guess, perhaps. Some ineffectiveness risk, perhaps. Like we saw with Saquon Barkley. You know, people yesterday in the Posse Kingdom Discord on the Splash Play channel tagging me, talking about, oh, I could finally see what the analytics were talking about with Saquon. He's not that good, at least didn't look that good to some people's eye tests last night. Just to me has always been kind of a pure volume back. For a guy like Austin Ekeler, I think that's the opposite, where he's been great this year, has been always pretty good analytically, but the volume of touches there was so heavy for him at the beginning of the year, getting 19 routes per game, getting just under 21 intended touches per game, or at 21 intended touches per game. So to me, Ekeler coming back in here, clearly a big missing part of this offense has been Ekeler not being out there. Josh Kelly not able to do what Ekeler does. Isaiah Spiller not able to do what Ekeler does. Dotson not able to do what Ekeler does. So him being out there, I think right away, he's another Chargers part that we probably have to have here. Chat, as always, appreciate all the GMs, the squad here, the Squirt Squad. Always appreciate you guys being live in chat. Always our regulars appreciate you. New people as well. Feel free to chime in chat. I think Splash Play, we have one of the best communities around, and it's not that big. So pretty easy to hop in and make yourself known right away. Who else can we go to here? So Ekeler is certainly live as a captain option, though, if he's going against the Cowboys defense that, again, very good on the year in most things. Negative 0.25 EPA per dropback allowed by this Dallas defense. Negative 0.3 EPA per pass. Negative 0.13 EPA per rush. Negative 0.33 per red zone rush as well. So everything that Dallas does defensively is good for the most part. Their one weak spot has been against the red zone passing. 0.28 EPA allowed there, which is actually one of the worst marks in the league. So bad against tight ends, bad against defending red zone passes. Those are the two things you can point to for a Cowboys defense. And it also kind of speaks to what we saw last week from the Niners. How did they get success? Using McCaffrey well, using George Kittle well. Those are things that are always going to be there. And that's why Eckler to me seems like one guy I'd put in more lineups than not. I think is a guy you could put into 5-1 Cowboys builds as well as potentially the one Charger coming back. I think a lot of ways you can get to Eckler here. And I still think as well, Keenan Allen, the preponderance of targets over the course of his career, Keenan Allen gets about one more target per game when Mike Williams isn't on the field. I know Keenan Allen, the last time we saw him, had the most disappointing game because he was as chalky as could be. And of course, is not that involved in the first game without Mike Williams. But I do think in this spot against Dallas, you have to get that ball downfield. I do think Keenan Allen's route running as well should be an advantage, should have some explosive plays, potentially against Stephon Gilmore, a cornerback who's given up some of the most explosive plays in the past game in the league, despite the fact this Dallas defense is so good. It does speak out there a little bit. So I think Keenan Allen, another guy I'm going to put in here, not as a captain. He will be a flex play. The captain's going to be a tough choice here. We have eaten away quite a bit of salary by going to Everett, Eckler, and Allen. You can make the case because I do have Everett in this lineup. Maybe you don't need to have Keenan Allen out there. But I think in this spot, okay, so I'm sorry. I'm getting some texts about the money owed by Football Outsiders. It continues to be an ongoing plot line in my life that is never going to get figured out, never going to get better for me. Let's look at captains, though. Captains we can look at. So the biggest spot to attack in the Chargers defense. So we've seen a few times the Chargers have played really bad out wide, giving up a 0.76 EPA out wide, which is actually the worst mark in the league right now. That could benefit CeeDee Lamb, who gets 15 targets or has gotten 15 targets on the year running out wide. Could also benefit Brandon Cooks, who's gotten 10 targets on the year running out wide. But the guy who's gotten the most targets on the year running out wide and has looked better in recent weeks, perhaps as he gets ramped up from the injury that certainly had him ineffective last year, Michael Gallup, 21 targets on the year, just a 0.03 EPA per target. I think CeeDee Lamb's certainly the more likely target to have an outlier day. We're trying to get different here, and I don't think CeeDee Lamb's going to sneak up on anybody as a captain. So I think that going to Michael Gallup as a captain, kind of an interesting move. Maybe he can get there with really two deep shots, and especially if we're jamming in the studs alongside of him, I do think this is a way that we can start to make some sense of a build here, actually get good players in. Gallup, the captain, can be very low owned. He's only 4,200 as a captain, which bodes pretty well. So this is definitely something for Gallup where I think that he's playing well enough. The matchup makes sense. Lamb, the much better play. Like, I would not put Gallup in the same stratosphere as CeeDee Lamb as a fantasy football player. For a showdown slate, we're trying to hit these minor outcomes, trying to get these ways to get up to first place. Playing Michael Gallup at captain is going to cut that ownership a lot. So do I have the most faith in the world that he can be the highest score on the slate? Not so much. But can he get me 20? That then comes 30 as a captain play. I think that's in the range of outcomes for Gallup, so I'm going to go there as well. Can you please get some good karma for a not suck Monday Night Football game? I think that's reasonable. DK shows Gallup has 4 targets total weeks 1 and 2, 18 in the last 3. So yes, he's come up that way. Maybe that makes him less of a sneaky play, but I just think the fact that he's this cheap, hard for me to ignore. And we still would like to leave some salary on the table here if we can to try to get unique here, though it is a single entry. So you need that a little bit less in a single entry than you do in some of the big tournaments like the Millie Maker Showdown tonight with a $20 entry fee on DraftKings. Who else can we put in here? I do think it's pretty likely that one of Tony Pollard or Dak Prescott make this lineup. Dak not running as much this year as we've talked about, running 2.4 times per game, about half as much as Justin Herbert is. That is something that does worry me about Dak, even though, again, I do expect he's going to actually have to pass in this game just because of the fact that the Chargers can put up a lot of points. And even if the Chargers start slow, we do know the Chargers can go on these hot runs, and I think Dallas will be aware of that and hopefully take the governor off of Dak a little bit more than it has been in the past. So between Dak and Pollard, man, I do think Dak's a solid play, but I think Pollard, just the red zone work for him is a little bit too hard to ignore. I'm going to go Pollard here over Dak. And I don't know, that's not usually the thing you do. If you have a wide receiver captain, I usually prefer to play the QB with him. But I think that Pollard's upside here is going to be a little bit higher just because he's going to be able to get into the red zone. I believe Pollard's still getting 6.2 red zone touches per game, 1.8 inside the 5-yard line per game, coming off of 2 bad games in a row. I think that going to Pollard here while we have Gallup at captain is a way to get unique. And frankly, I do think that Pollard is the better play. That said, if I didn't have Keenan Allen in here, and hard in DraftKings to fade Keenan Allen, but if I didn't put Keenan Allen in, I think then we get to Dak more. I think I'm going to play this as though Gerald Everett cuts away enough of Keenan Allen, even though I believe that Keenan Allen's a strong play, again, especially on DraftKings, on FanDuel, and an MVP spot. You can get away from a little bit more. On FanDuel, you're just chasing the touchdowns. You know, same thing for whatever underdog slates you're probably trying to do. For Dak on DraftKings, I think he think he makes sense in this build, but really you go Dak here, you go Keenan Allen here. Neither would really upset me too much, but because of the build we're making, I think we have to make some sort of bet on Dak as well. Because obviously the bet here is that Dak's gonna be able to get the ball downfield to Michael Gallup. Michael Gallup cashes in 1 or 2 touchdowns. I think ideally 2 in this build. Tony Pollard cleans up 2 more. That's your game, basically. That's how Dak makes the lineup, and Pollard does, and maybe Keenan Allen doesn't. All right, so we have 10-4 left, and we do want to leave salary on the table here to some amount. I think we should probably, because we're not playing Keenan Allen, should probably try to cut away with him. Somebody here, Josh Palmer, going to be an obvious one. Quentin Johnston, up to 20.3 snaps per game, 14.3 routes per game. He is not very good based on what he's shown so far. He was great in college at TCU, though, so I think I am willing to take a flyer on him potentially here. Could also play the kickers. Let's say the Chargers get downfield, but don't punch it in. No, you know what? I think for me, Ferguson's still an interesting play as well. Do I want to go with 3-3? I feel like 3-3 is going to be pretty popular. Ah, man, this is tough. Quentin Johnston, I think, makes sense in this build. Aubrey, I think, also makes sense in this build as well. Dicker. It's got to be one of these guys in here. Leaving about $5K on the table in salary. Gallup definitely mispriced. I agree with that. You think for the 5th pick here, probably not a lot of defenses played today, which I think will be a positive thing in this build. Last night, we saw really expensive Bills D get played. $6,600 is their salary. And they still got played 20% of the time at captain. So that was a pretty big crush there overall of ownership coming that way, because it was a low total game, because it was one where the Bills were expected to kind of blow out the Giants. Obviously, the Giants hung in there until the literal end of the game. I think playing a defense here is your way to get different. So I actually am going to go Cowboys D, leave 6,600 on the table, which is a lot of money. But if you review pro players lineups, as you should do, look at the 150 max for lineups, especially the guys that are good, the Ricky D's of the world, Petty Theft, Osmo, of course, we talk about here all the time. Those guys will leave. Sometimes we'll have an average salary across 150 lineups of 44,000, 45,000. So I think you have to get a little more comfortable with that, especially in general when you're hand building. So I'm going to go with this one. Gallup at captain, Gerald Everett, Austin Eckler, Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard, Cowboys D. So we're saying Cowboys D does enough to knock Justin Herbert out of the lineup. We're also saying that Gerald Everett gets enough going to knock Keenan Allen out, but also not enough that he's adding so much value to Justin Herbert's day. And Austin Eckler runs a little bit, catches a little bit. He can get there on just PPR points alone. I think this makes sense. It doesn't feel like the greatest build. Leaving out Justin Herbert makes you really uncomfortable. That's what we talk about a lot with these showdown builds, especially when we talk about our 3 takeaways at the end of the video. It's not about what you think is a good lineup sometimes. It's about getting a unique combination here that gives you an actual chance to get the first. This one with a low price tag with Gallup at captain, those are 2 really big levers. And then the Cowboys D as well. I think those are 3 really big levers here we have to jump the field. So is it the best lineup you could possibly make? Is it the optimal? No fucking chance. But this is one that I think can actually make a jump upwards. So I'm going to put him in here, enter it for $5. Let's go. Love Stars wants Quentin Johnston. I think that's a fair one when you're not playing Keenan Allen, especially not playing Keenan Allen and Josh Palmer. But I do think Gerald Everett kind of serves the same purpose there. So that's my logic for it, but I get it. Would I play a Dallas tight end not named Ferguson? If so, which one? I probably would not be inclined to. I guess if I had to choose, let me check the route data here. Probably would be Schumacher, I think, just because Schumacher does get enough work overall. Chargers, Giants. Okay. Who's running the most snaps per game? Hendershot playing 32 snaps per game. Schumacher playing 25. Hendershot targeted 5.9% of targets, or per route run, rather. Schumacher targeted 22% of the time. And Schumacher has gotten red zone targets at a decent rate. So it would be Schumacher for me if you're playing one that's not Ferguson. But Ferguson's work, as we talked about in the Spags rankings video last week, it's basically been as much as any tight end in the league, especially in the red zone. So I think that Ferguson is one that you shouldn't be fading directly. But Schumacher and Hendershot are playing enough snaps that both can be played. I would prefer Schumacher, though. I think he's a little more talented. And Hendershot is also an awful dude. If you want to ever Google Peyton Hendershot, you're going to find some things that are not the most pleasant to find. But let's look at the projections here. Of course, we're going to run the optimizer in a moment. Here's the stochastic data. Oh, he's on IR. Okay, there we go. So it's obvious. It's just Schumacher. So I didn't realize. Oh, you guys are catching me lately, though. Last week, obviously Hendershot being on IR is going to be a different thing. Last week we talked about Lil Jordan Humphrey and how he got waived. Then he was fucking back on the team. In between the time frame of doing the video, he was on the waivers, was available for anybody. Then he's back in the game. So shit always moves around with showdowns. Keep that in mind here, of course, if you're watching this video later in the day. But Hendershot being on IR, he's not likely to get off of that. So good to know. Shout out to the chat. All right, Justin Herbert, number 1 projected overall. Keenan Allen, number 2. So keep that in mind here. You're probably going to see Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert getting into a lot more lineups than not. Number 3, Dak Prescott. Number 4, Tony Pollard. Number 5, CeeDee Lamb. Austin Eckler seemingly getting a little bit of a ding coming off the ankle injury. Something to keep in mind here projection-wise. I have no issue going to Eckler coming off this ankle issue. I think he certainly spent more than enough time on the sidelines to get himself healthy, got the bye week as well. So Eckler, I would predict being good to go. But, the effectiveness of that, again, we saw Saquon last night, who is not as good of a running back as Austin Eckler, but still did look less efficient than he normally does. Got there still in terms of the final lineup there. He was one of the 2 Giants that made it. It was him and Wandale in the winning lineup. So something to keep in mind there. But I do think in this spot, I would like Eckler a little bit more than the projections currently have him. Top value according to Stochastics projections. And of course, these will change throughout the day. So keep that in mind. Pay for it yourself if you want to make sure to get the updated data later today. Jalen Tolbert, number 1, 2.5 projection for him is a 12.5x value. So he's probably the guy that people will jam in a little bit more than they should. Luke Schumacher, especially with this Peyton Hendershot news, him being on IR. Luke Schumacher, I think another guy that makes some amount of sense. He's not as much involved as a guy like Jake Ferguson is, but Schumacher's still a nice leverage play there, 12 personnel sets. It's certainly a way that can get there. Deuce Vaughn, everybody loves Deuce Vaughn. He's not very good, but he certainly can maybe punch one in there, do his own bootleg Austin Eckler impression of an even smaller version of Austin Eckler. Makes some amount of sense. Stone Smart, I think, is in here because of the chance that Donald Parham might not go. Let me make sure that Parham is not in these projections. Parham, again, currently questionable. So no, he is in this one. Stone Smart could theoretically get an even bigger projection bump if we do see Donald Parham out. I don't think it really matters that much, but you would probably see an increase in projection of Gerald Everett, increase in projection of Stone Smart. And Michael Gallup here rounds it out. One of the top values on the slate, despite being priced at $2,800. Just too cheap for Michael Gallup, even though Michael Gallup, we know, comes with some risk, but $2,800 Michael Gallup does feel a little bit insane and kind of makes you wonder if he's going to be a little bit overowned just because of the fact that he's projecting well. He's really cheap. He's had a couple good games in a row. I might be a little bit of a chalk donkey playing Michael Gallup, but we'll find out. Parham full practice Thursday and Friday. All right. So people want, yeah, look, I get it. I think that when you're targeting just Parham's usage in the red zone, it's a little bit finicky, especially because that usage has come with Josh Kelly being the guy who's serving as a decoy in this play action plays. Gerald Everett's on the field a lot more. So I still think that Everett is a play you go to. It just feels like Everett not getting targeted as much as he should, but sometimes that just means that Gerald Everett's due to get targeted more. Something to keep in mind. Top owned plays. Let's look at these. Again, this will get updated over the course of the day as well. And again, it does feel like Parham, I guess, trending towards playing, though still questionable on the injury report as of now. Top owned plays, though. Keenan Allen, number 1 overall. Justin Herbert, number 2. Tony Pollard, number 3. CeeDee Lamb, number 4. Dak Prescott, number 5. So right away, I would guess that probably separating Allen and Herbert is one way to get unique because of the high ownership going there and these guys being the 2 highest projected players. Tony Pollard, CeeDee Lamb. If you go to anything else in the Dallas pass game besides CeeDee Lamb, that's one way to get different as well. Of these guys, highest owned captain. Similar order here, moves around a little bit though. Keenan Allen, captain. Tony Pollard, captain. Justin Herbert, captain. CeeDee Lamb, captain. Austin Eckler, that's your top 5 captain-owned plays. All those guys projected to be over 10%. So if you do go to Gallup at captain at least, that is one way to shave it down. I find it hard to believe, though, only 26% of lineups have Gallup. I think that's, with his price tag and recent usage, does feel like Gallup should be a little bit higher owned. Is Quentin Johnson a sneaky play? It does seem like ownership-wise he would be. I don't know that he can make it as captain, but he's going to be really low owned to captain as well. 22% ownership. Would like to see it under 20 if you can get it, but I think that Quentin Johnson, I don't think he's sneaky because people will play him for sure. If they don't play Keenan Allen, or if they do play Keenan Allen, they'll probably pair him with one more pass catcher. It's more likely to be Josh Palmer, but still Quentin Johnson is out there as a wide receiver 3. So I don't think he's sneaky by any stretch, but it's possibly ends up a little bit lower owned just because he has not produced anything fantasy-wise that would make people flock to him. Guys that are 10% owned that you can look at if you want to really decrease your ownership product. Josh Kelly, Deuce Vaughn, the aforementioned Donald Parham. I guess the Q tag on him on DraftKings might be a thing that makes people play him less. So Donald Parham maybe gains a little bit of potential there just because of the fact that I think that he would be jammed in a little bit more because of his recent touchdown success. But it does feel like maybe the Q tag knocks him down a little bit more with the casuals that don't want to play anybody who's recently come off of an injury. Jalen Tolbert, who we talked about, Schumacher here at 5%. Kavontae Turpin, who was banged up last game. I'm not sure if he'll be active, but just something to keep in mind here. Can break it open in one play. And then a bunch of other assholes who probably won't get much burn. Darius Davis, Stone Smart, Simi Fujoko. Yeah, sure. I'm sure Simi Fujoko will be the difference maker tonight, though. Last night it was Quentin Morris and Deontay Hardy. So maybe, I don't know. Can't rule on anybody in Showdown. Let me make sure I have the most recent projections. And now let's optimize. So let's see what we get in here. All right, we got the right game going. Let's upload the data. We're going to do in this part, of course, is not going to be an exact representation of what the field's going to be. What it does tell you, though, is where these particular projections are going to push people more so. So Kasic's projections, obviously going to be ones that use a lot in the normal course of a series of a big tournament, but also they're just a reflection of what the field's going to do for the most part. There's not really big gaps in projections between the different sites for the most part. So this will give us a good reflection of what would look the best. Would you play Dallas defense? I don't hate the idea. The Chargers drop back a lot. Dallas's defense pretty good on the year. It is more expected by Vegas to be a higher scoring game. But if you have, I mean, if you're talking about Showdown, yes, I would play them. If you're talking about your redraft league, you don't have any other options anyway at this point. So yes, I would play Dallas defense in pretty much any format. But yeah, you have to keep in mind, though, it is a game total over 50. So playing the Dallas defense, the reason you play that in Showdown is because it's making unique, not because it's like a great play on its face. Top owned players here according to the projections. So let's see who's coming up the most at captain. So right now we're getting Keenan Allen in 96% of these 25 lineups. We're getting Justin Herbert in every single lineup. We're also getting a lot of Michael Gallup captain. So I was aligned with the optimizer, I guess, in terms of putting Gallup there. But it does mean that Gallup captain perhaps going to be a little bit higher owned than it should be. He's coming up 30% of the time in these 25 lineups. Anybody else on 100%? CeeDee Lamb in almost 100% of these lineups, 72% at flex, 16% at captain, so he's in 98% of them. So CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen in almost every lineup, Justin Herbert in every lineup, and it is Michael Gallup in every lineup too. Fuck. All right, so because of that projection, it does look like Michael Gallup is getting in every single lineup too. So two guys that are getting into every single lineup projection-wise, Herbert, Michael Gallup, which is a bit of a surprise, but definitely one that I think is important to note here, because that does mean that people will be forced to play these guys a little bit more. And that could definitely make it tough if you are going heavy Michael Gallup, like it seemed might be a good play based on the price total. Anything else here that stands out in the team stacks? 5-1's coming up a little bit for Dallas, not coming up at all for the Chargers. 4-2 is the most popular for Dallas. 17 out of 25 lineups are a Dallas 4-2. And then you're getting a good amount of 3-3s as well, and some amount of 4-2s for the Chargers, but not these Yeah, this is pretty tough, man. This is a weird slate with this one where I would have expected more 3-3s, but I do think that going to 5-1s is going to have some amount of appeal. Obviously, people not playing the blowout. And one thing to keep in mind, too, that Chargers Stadium, it's going to be full of Dallas fans, so it's not going to feel like a Chargers home game. There are so many Cowboys fans in LA in general, so many Cowboys fans in California, so many fans that travel for these games. Something to keep in mind there, the home field advantage probably not going to be the same as it was for some of these other games we've seen recently. So that's just one thing I'll flag right away. Are kickers coming up at all? No, barely any Brandon Aubrey, barely any Cameron Dicker, and then no defenses at all coming up. So I think right away here, yeah. Well, let's see. Chargers D, pick 6 from Dak, certainly in play. Double D is certainly in play. There's a lot of ways here I think you can attack this where it's just playing a less sexy game. So that includes the kickers. If they're not coming up, I do expect that the Cowboys should be able to move the field a little bit. Brandon Aubrey probably benefits more so if Tony Pollard doesn't score touchdowns. So Brandon Aubrey in play. Cameron Dicker, you could certainly see him get there. We saw Graham Gano almost make a winning lineup last night against a much tougher, or I guess not similarly tough Buffalo D. Cameron Dicker can get there just on the strength of this Chargers offense being good. But kickers and defenses overall, very underplayed in this game. And with a high team total, that could certainly mean that 5 drives stall out and you see 5 Brandon Aubrey kicks. Would not be the craziest thing in the world. So just something to keep in mind. All right. Let's Let's look at the Sims now. I think we've learned enough from that part of the process. Of course, what this is going to do is generate a lineup pool, basically. It's meant to typify what the field will look like. So 10,000 lineups will be built here, probably a little bit less because it can't sometimes find 10,000 unique Showdown lineups to build. But it's going to build it for us here. Then it's going to have these 10,000 lineups compete against each other 40,000 times. And that's how that's going to go. And of course, while we're waiting for this one, we'll quickly pander. Please subscribe down below. Please hit the like button. Please leave a comment. Splash Play goes on Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. every single day. So come back here tomorrow. We'll do our best ball review show. Wednesday, the Spags rankings, the new and improved, leaner Spags rankings. Of course, Thursday, another Showdown video. Friday, the fantasy football gauntlet that looks a lot like this process for the main slate. So come hang out here on Splash Play every single day. All right, let's simulate these lineups here. Nobody too big of a difference from the pool. You're getting more Cameron Dicker. That's fine. Let's see. All right. We got, I think today, what is today's Showdown? 2.25. So it's basically like 50% of the pool going to first in the Millie Maker. So yeah. All right. 30%. Let's do that. We'll run the Sims here. Of course, you want to upload your own projections. You would do that here. Download the template, insert them as you want. As I've always mentioned here, I do split my projections between stochastic and ETR to try to get a better field representation. So that's my process. Do what you want to do for yours. Are there particular contests you target in Showdowns? I play usually the various 20 maxes and then the mini max some days. Well, on Thursdays and Mondays, rather, I always play the mini max as well. And then on Sundays, I just kind of hand build some. And I don't like playing Sunday Night Football because A, I feel like those games always end up fucking being awful. And then B, I end up just like chasing a little bit too much, trying to target things that I wouldn't normally. So for me, it is usually the 20 maxes and then like 20 to 30 in the Millie Maker tournament. Because again, I get off on the big prize pools. It's always going to be my thing. Okay, let's look at these lineups here. Top ROI lineup by a wide margin is this one. So this one is basically getting more than double the ROI of the next highest one. And let's see if it's unique enough to get there. Keenan Allen at captain, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, Deuce Vaughn, Justin Herbert, Michael Gallup. The Deuce Vaughn of that part of that makes it a little bit more unique, but a 49.5 salary, I just don't think that's going to get there and be unique enough. Like it says 0 dupes here, but I find it very hard to believe it actually would be 0 dupes. And that is one of the biggest challenges I will say of any of these tools. I talked about SaberSim before. I have not used Run the Sims, have not used the solver for this stuff, but I have to imagine it's a similar thing. It's hard to predict the amount of dupes that you're going to get. The main way to predict the amount of dupes or to try to get it down the most is just going to be to drop down a lot in salary. Playing again 49.5, playing deuce, like these are things that certainly can make your ownership come down, but is it going to come down enough to give you a single win? I'm not so sure about that, but it does kind of become a hard needle to thread with that one, where if you come down too much, you still want to have things that have a chance of winning, have some win rate at all. But this one stands out a lot. So projections are going to move around and all of that. But if you're going to play one lineup tonight, I guess right now, it would be this one right now with Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, Deuce Vaughn, Justin Herbert, Michael Gallup. Let's favorite the top 150. And let's look at Steven's question as well. You think there is a lot more throwing, more opportunity for sacks and picks? It's not a bad contrarian play. Yeah, the defenses tonight, I think, just on their face are a better contrarian play than they would be normally. Same thing for the kickers as well, especially because on the Dallas side, I really do expect them to be able to move the ball. So if that's the case, I think Brandon Aubrey is a pretty strong kicker play. Kicker and defenses also do correlate positively, so you can maybe find a way to get to Cowboys D and Brandon Aubrey. Not saying that you have to, but I do think that's one way you can try to get really different right away. But just because of the high total here, as a result, defenses and kickers, anytime you see a total over 50, just know that for the most part, defenses and kickers going to go a little bit underrepresented. All right. Top ROI players, top exposure players. Let's look at that first. Top exposure players, Justin Herbert, Dak Prescott, according to the Sims, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Tony Pollard. All these guys slightly negative ROI, but coming up a lot. Top leverage players, Justin Herbert at the flex, Quentin Johnson at the flex. So there we go. Keenan Allen, a captain, coming up a lot here, which does make some amount of sense, of course. Should be able to rack up PPR points pretty easily, even if he doesn't have the greatest game in the world. Deuce Vaughn coming up a lot in the flex. I mean, I know this has been an ongoing theme since the offseason. I don't think Deuce Vaughn has much juice. I don't think he's very good, but he is coming up here as a sim play that makes sense. Jalen Tolbert, getting leverage on him. Justin Herbert, a captain. Here are all the guys you're getting leverage on. Best ROI overall is fucking Deuce Vaughn at the flex. I guess you got to play some Deuce Vaughn tonight. I don't think it's responsible for me to tell you to not do what the Sims say. Obviously, you have to wiggle around the Sims sometimes. That is a key part of how you approach this stuff. The Sims tell you part of the tale, but it's also telling you the chalkiest possible outcomes of the tale. That said, Deuce Vaughn here, 53% ROI and an 18% exposure. You have to play some Deuce, I guess. Deuce getting 12 snaps per game, but getting 6 intended touches per game on those 12 snaps. So it does make some amount of sense there. Rico Dowdle, I guess, would be the sim leverage then. He's playing 11 snaps per game and getting 6 touches. Dowdle and Vaughn, I would say, are basically the same play besides the salary difference. So, yeah, I guess to get sim leverage, playing Rico Dowdle, I think, does make some amount of sense. Quentin Johnston, captain, seems fun. Let's see how those lineups look here. If you want to find a captain in a stochastic sim, what you would do is starts with and put in the person's name. So Quentin, here we go. Here's your top Quentin Johnston captain lineups. Quentin Johnston, Austin Eckler, Brandon Aubrey, Josh Palmer, Justin Herbert, Tony Pollard. So you're getting big leverage against Keenan Allen with this one. I like this build besides the price point. I think 49.9 does make that pretty likely to have some dupes. This one has 6 dupes on it, so it's probably got even more than that in an actual live tournament. Quentin Johnston, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Michael Gallup. Well, we've got a QJ week at some point. It's got to come at some point, but the issue is like you probably at this point, I think, need Palmer to not be out there or at least to be banged up, I guess, like he is today. That's probably a way he can get there, but it just feels like he's not ready for prime time. And the only way he's going to be kind of earn the playing time is going to be him going out there and showing out in a major way. And I think that it's tough for him to show out enough because he's not going to get in the crush of routes, especially with 2 tight ends they want to go to a good amount. And running backs too, they want to use pretty heavily in the pass game. What's the lineup that I would actually play with Quentin Johnston and captain? This one gets a little bit closer. 48.3 salary. Quentin Johnston, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, Jake Ferguson, Josh Palmer, Justin Herbert. No Austin Eckler in that one. Does make it a little bit tough. 47.1. Okay, this one's got Quentin Johnston, Eckler, Aubrey, Chargers D, Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen. Yeah, I think this is more the area I would try to target, under 45K salary. If you're trying to win a Millie Maker, especially if you're doing like a 3 max or something, you don't have to get this crazy. But Quentin Johnston, Dak Prescott, Jake Ferguson, Justin Herbert, Michael Gallup, Tony Pollard. I think you're getting a lot of the best parts of the seam here. I wouldn't hate swapping Justin Herbert to Austin Eckler in this build and just saying that the QB didn't get there in that particular construction. But I think that makes some amount of sense. Any interesting ones here? What's the worst ROI lineup? Let's look at that. Or at least what it thinks is the worst ROI lineup. All right. This one's supposedly the worst ROI. Luke Schumacher, captain, Austin Eckler, Cameron Dicker, Dak Prescott, Josh Palmer, Keenan Allen. Probably not anybody playing this one at a 43.5 salary. Luke Schumacher, not the most likely captain. That is something to keep in mind, too. If you are playing a captain, you still do want to target guys that have that ceiling that can get you at least 20 points, ideally, 30 points if they can. So hard to imagine any world where Luke Schumacher gets you a 20-point game. But this one, though, where you have like Justin Herbert, a captain in a very low salary, Herbert with a double stack of Keenan Allen and Donald Parham, Chargers D, Dak Prescott, Kevontae Turpin. That's more like a very cheap lineup you can play. And because you're knocking off so much salary, you can take this dupes metric here at face value because you're just not likely to get duped that much if you are leaving that much salary on the table. Dallas has been so gross to watch. They have been, but at a certain point, I don't know. I want to say it's going to look better for them at a certain point. I don't know that it will because I just don't believe in the coaching staff being able to turn around this offense. But if they're going to have a good game, this is the best matchup for them to probably have a good game. Whereas one like that Niners game is the worst one because they're just going to be less efficient per touch. If they're less efficient per touch, per snap, all that stuff, they're just not going to have the success. Whereas the Chargers offer you an opportunity to be more efficient per play. And that's where Dallas can sort of thrive. But the game script has to work out. They just can't attack downfield. Dak on the year I saw has like an ADOT of about 6. So like he's just not getting it downfield enough. And that's the way to beat the Chargers. So we'll see what happens. But let's go with our 3 takeaways. As always, at the end of the video, we'll give you guys 3 takeaways that I think will help you make more unique lineups. Number 1 would right away be playing more kickers and defenses. Obviously, it's a high total game, but kickers still could score a lot of points in a high total game. Like last night, Tyler Bass, if he were not as incompetent as he was, he would have made a winning lineup. So that was one, too, where the Bills had a very high implied total for themselves, and Tyler Bass just missed a 50-yarder, I think missed a 40-yarder. So that would have been enough to knock him into that starting lineup over some other guys. So kickers and defenses here, always in play. And in high total games, for some reason, people just don't go that way, but they still contribute points to a total. So that's something to keep in mind here. Cowboys D in particular, I would favor it, but Cowboys D, Chargers D, just getting them in as part of a sampling of lineups, I think is a pretty good move. Number 2 would be Michael Gallup is very interesting, but I worry about the projections. ETR did not have the projections out before the show, so I couldn't really check and balance how that goes. But if they're saying Michael Gallup's going to be pretty highly played, I'd be worried about that one a little bit more. He just projects too well. And again, he's coming up. It's two guys coming up in every single lineup. Justin Herbert, Michael Gallup. That's a weird thing then. If that's the case, then Michael Gallup projects so well, there's probably some tournament theory logic in just going to Brandon Cooks, who's done nothing so far on the year. Brandon Cooks still getting a good amount of routes. Where's Cooks here? Yeah, Cook's still getting 45 snaps per game, running 26 routes per game. So technically running the same amount as Gallup, playing the same amount as Gallup. So I think Brandon Cooks is actually pretty good leverage if we do see, if it just feels like Michael Gallup throughout the day, if you're hearing about him on other streams, if ETR talks about him with Gary and Cody Main coming up later today, just be wary of Michael Gallup if that's the case. But for right now, he does look like one of the best projected plays. And then number 3 would be, I still think getting into Chargers tight end is one that's important to me. Dallas is just so bad against tight end, and they do have enough guys playing tight end snaps out there. Everett playing a lot, as we talked about. Parham playing some of those red zone looks that still could be there, perhaps even more so with Austin Eckler, but I do think they're going to be more inclined to not fuck around with Austin Eckler like they did with Josh Kelly on some of those goal line touches. But I think that Austin Eckler, Donald Parham, two guys that I would sneak into a lot of lineups tonight just because of the fact that it is a really good matchup going against tight end for Dallas. So that's something for me with that Dallas defense. It doesn't have a lot of weaknesses, but tight end is a very obvious one. And also, I guess that could sort of theoretically benefit Keenan Allen because tight end snaps can look a lot like slot snaps, but Keenan's running enough out wide that I do think it really does meaningfully impact the actual guys playing tight end. So there we go, guys. That is going to be your showdown video for today. Of course, we'll be doing another one for Thursday Night Football. But as always, guys, please do subscribe down below. Please hit the like button. Please leave a comment if you're watching after the fact. If you have any questions, anything you want to run by me, happy to give you guys the data if you leave a comment down below. So please do that. Of course, hit the join button down below as well. $4.99 a month. You get to be a part of the Squirt Squad officially. You get a special helmet on here. You're supporting the channel. And of course, I also give you guys my data sheet at the end of the week as well to show you guys all the data points I look at. But there we go. Follow me at Chris Spags. Follow the show at Splash Play Pod and come back tomorrow. Best ball review show where we can lick some wounds. We can look at my DraftKings lineups that are crushing. And we can look at my underdog lineups that are crushing my soul. So appreciate all you guys being here. I will talk to you guys again soon. Enjoy your days. And of course, good luck. Bye.